to support the small businesses of Australia, which is under 20 employees. That's 97% of the businesses in Australia. So look, just summarising this video, which I've called PS to the demise of the Australian economy. There's a couple of other little facts that I didn't mention, and I'm just tying up biblical prophecy, just touching on biblical prophecy. I don't want to go overboard with that for the listener. So Professor Steve Keen announced that due to the massive personal and business debt, remember that Australia's $5.7 trillion in debt. Go onto my website healysnomorebs.com and have a look at the Australian debt counter, the USA debt counter, and you will find out what the real facts are. The $800 billion of government debt is a drop in the bucket compared to the national debt, including business and personal debt. Remember before I said the sleight of hand with John Howard and Costello was to shift the deficit of $21 billion, 21, not 800, $21 billion. They shifted it off the balance book and they put it into private debt via the first home buyer's bribe, loan. So, you know, they put people in debt back there in the Howard days. Personally, they took took the burden of debt on, and they created a false economy in such that they generated like housing building booms and the bubble associated with it. Now, a new home buyer is looking at $800,000 for a home, just a normal home. $800,000, $1,000 a week repayments for 30 years? Ridiculous. So that bubble's reached maximum capacity and it can only burst from here. 2016 is the year of financial transformations. So in about September this year, you will see a great paradigm shift. In the coming election, 2016, 2nd of July, I'm telling everyone to vote independents into the Senate. Don't worry about the lower house. It's just like a circus anyhow, so you don't have to worry about it. Everything has got to go to review in the Senate. The Senate is where the power really lies. So there's a rush for the Senate. As Bob Catter said, there's a fight on for the Senate. And so there should be. Remember the Healy's suggestion on how to vote. Have a look at my website on that particular page. Go through the links and vote independence. Now, what independence you vote, that's up to you. I'm personally voting for the Brick with Eyes, Glenn Lazarus, but I do recommend the Australian Liberty Alliance. Also, please have a look at the video done by Senator David Leyonhjelm of the Australian Democrats. Now, Liberal Democrats. He has done a video about politicians being sorry for what they've done to the Australian people over successive governments. Now, he really summarises the injustice and the complete and utter recklessness of Liberal, Labor and Greens that have actually absolutely stuffed the Australian economy. A bunch of bureaucrats running businesses is a recipe for disaster. What you've got to do is get advice from people who actually run a business and how to run the country. Anyway, I'm not going to go into that, that'll take too long. Now, Professor Steve Keen, what did he say about 3 or 4 years ago when I was listening to his material? Very, very smart man, Professor Steve Keen. He's now in the UK. They tried to run him out of Sydney apparently because he's talking too much truth. But what he said, he's the one that drew the attention to private debt. As he said, in the aggregate of the national economy, you've got to count private debt. Because it's debt. Debt is debt. You can't just slip it off the books and say government debt, private debt, forget about the private debt. The private debt is a big elephant in the room. Okay. Now what does he say? Money, as we know, without going into detail, you want to learn the full thing on fiat money, go onto Mike Maloney's site, which is linked into my website, and he's done a full set of video education on the history of money from the BRICS arrangement after World War II through the Nixon taking the gold standard off the US dollar, all that right through to 2016. He's probably the best educator, apart from Jim Rickards, on the planet at the moment, in my opinion, of the alternate media that's actually telling the truth and is not tied in with politics, big business and corrupted. He's not corrupted. So you want to educate yourself, just follow the links on my website and you'll get up to speed. It took me 4 years to do this, so it might take you only a few weeks. Now, Professor Steve Keen quoted this, and this crosses over with biblical prophecy. The debt jubilee. He said, Professor Steve Keen said, the only way out of this, now he's an economist, he's not being religious or anything, he said is a debt jubilee. In other words, cancelling of all debts. Just as you would do if you're in bankruptcy. The debt is cancelled and you're on probation, I suppose, for 5 to 7 years, and then you can restart again. Now the whole country's on probation. So we've got to cancel that debt. You know this, Australia doesn't need to be a slave to the lenders that's going on at the moment. It doesn't need to be a slave to the multinational corporations. It doesn't need to be part of the EU. It doesn't need to be part of anything, actually. As I said to you originally, Australia has the capacity to be a sovereign nation, and then as a sovereign nation, we don't need international trade deals according to other people. We can do those deals as a sovereign nation to other sovereign nations. The financial crisis is coming, there's no question about that. Actually, it's already here, behind the scenes. It's just got to erupt, a bit like a bubble bursting or an infected boil. I'll put it this way, like a boil that's been burst. The corruption is under the surface and it's ready to burst out. That's a terrible analogy, but it's true. So September this year, you're going to see the bursting of the bubble, and you're going to see a lot of toxic stuff come out. Then what you're going to see from July 2, there'll be about, I'm predicting this, a 30% shift to the Senate of independents. Have a look at the independents I've selected on healysnomorebs.com. Take your selection, but put the regular parties, the Liberals, the National Liberals, the ALP and the Greens right on the bottom of the list. We've had enough, unless of course you want more of the same. Then I suggest that you maybe get a psychological assessment or something like that, because really it's a total mess. And anyone who's been in business, as I speak to business owners, generally speaking, their turnovers are down to 20% of what it was in 2007. So everyone is just crawling along, and in the last 30 years that I know of, not one, either side of politics, has done anything to help the small business owner, which is 97% of the businesses in Australia. They've done nothing. A token here, a token there. They've done nothing significant. They haven't, as I've said earlier on in these DVDs, what to do, like remove provisional tax. It's a double tax that we don't need it. Take off the burden of having to pay people's superannuation as an employee. Let the employee look after that. That's their own superannuation. Surely they're big enough and old enough to look after their own super. And have approximately 250,000 to 500,000 tax-free threshold for every small business to get money circulating back in the system. Anyway, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but I just want to try and make this as simple as possible. So the debt jubilee. Grab out a Bible and have a look at Leviticus 25. On the 49th year / 50th year, God himself proclaimed that everything belongs to God. This is one way of looking at it. And he proclaimed, this is God talking in the Bible, Leviticus 25, a release of all debt. The slaves return back to their wherever land they want to go. If they want to remain with the people they're with, they can. But the properties that have been leased out return to the original owners, because what God says in Leviticus 25, he said everything on heaven and earth is mine. So we are just stewards. As a matter of fact, we want to carry that principle without being religious. We'll carry that principle through. Public servants are supposed to be servants, not what we've got now, a bunch of bureaucratic overlords that think it's a big joke to watch the rest of Australia suffer while they feather their own nest. You know, as Fat Cat Hockey said, the time of entitlement's over, and it's over for the politicians. We want real representation in Australia, people who actually care about the local community and aren't associated with big business and party politics. We want independence in the power of things, and that's what's going to happen. So the debt jubilee, as of the new government will come in as of the 2nd of July, and you'll watch a big swing to the independence, as I predicted 3 or 4 years ago. It's now happening. You'll watch a dissolving of the federal government. That's not going to continue as it is. It's just a complete, it's dead in the water, let's put it that way. So we'll have the Senate. The Senate will increase in power. They'll have territories. We'll bypass the federal government altogether. We'll get rid of all those bureaucrats in Canberra. We'll kick them out, take all their they can try and survive on $250 a week on the dole or on the aged care pension like the rest of us have got to try and do, and then think that's okay. So we'll recalibrate everything, and then we'll bring incentive back to small business. That is how to refire the economy. Now, there are a lot of changes that are going to happen. This is going to happen globally, it's going to happen nationally, and there's going to be a whole lot of restructuring going. From September 2016, you watch and wait and see what happens. Now, in the meantime, vote independence into the Senate. If you don't want more of the same stupidity that you watch on television every day, if you don't want that, vote independence into the Senate. My prediction, there will be at least 30% independence in the Senate. Then we, the people, will have control over their future, and it will carry on from there. So we are in for big changes, but Australia's got a good future in the big picture. All we've got to do is get, the control, let's say the control panel, away from incompetent bureaucratic fools in Canberra. And we want to get people who actually are sensitive to the needs of the people of Australia rather than the political machine and big business. So that's it for today, and I'm closing off the video. I'll see you on the other side of the financial crisis, and when you watch this, remember it's not just me saying this. There is a whole global movement talking about the financial crisis to come. It's well overdue. We're in the Jubilee year, if you look at it spiritually speaking, and a lot of the evangelists, for instance, in the US and all around the world, are predicting the great transfer of wealth. Transfer of wealth from where to where? Transfer of wealth from the unrighteous, corrupt people to the people who are doing the right thing, like you and me, and most of the Australian population are just struggling from week to week, trying to earn a living, trying to pay for their kids to go to school and what have you. They're not interested in these big highfalutin ideas. They're only interested basically in ensuring that their children have some sort of future. At the moment, your children have got zero future under the current regime. And just as Bob Dylan said, and I was talking to a few people the other day, and I'll finish on this, it really reminds me of the 1970s, 80s, around about the Vietnam War era. And, Bob Dylan came out with that song, The Times